Hey all, welcome back to the channel. Brendan here, aka Cliff Jumper, and we are returning to one of our repeat customers, the Mk4 1.8T Jetta. She's a little extra, and she's decided to give us a little extra this week with a weird problem. So keep following along, and we'll get into it. Yeah, so if you've been following the saga of this wonderful vehicle, it's actually a blessing to us, but she is old and she's got old car problems compounded by some other stuff. We had this gorilla, I'll just call it a gorilla, not a mechanic, a gorilla ripped through the thing and attempted to replace the motor with a better motor and did not do a good job at that and left us with thousands of dollars in expenses to repair all the damage that they caused. Anyway, that's a long story. There are many videos about that. She's been driving nicely for a while, but recently we've got a transmission code and a really interesting set of symptoms that pops up. So this, turns out, has been a long time problem since way back in the days when these things were still new. Here's the problem. You're driving in lower gears, and let me back up for a second and say, this car has the 5-speed Tiptronic transmission in it, the 09A, not the regular 01M 4-speed automatic. So this one is a little special, and it has some quirks and features that go along with it. So here's what goes on. Driving normally, it's holding in gear all the way up to about 6,000 RPM and then shifting, even at part throttle, which is weird behavior. It should be shifting at like 2,500 at part throttle, and maybe, 3,500, $4,000 at mid throttle, and maybe it'll take it up to 6 for full throttle shifting, but it shouldn't do that for every shift. And there are a whole bunch of transmission codes that have popped along with it, which indicate the fluid level, or I'm sorry, the fluid temperature sensor is getting an intermittent reading. It's getting some intermittent shift, implausible signals. There's a few other signals that are implausible. And doing a little bit of research, it turns out that many of these problems can be sorted out from two things. So there are 3 steps to approaching this. The first is a simple clearing of all the codes and resetting the TCU, the transmission control unit, in addition to resetting the throttle body, and there's another setting that has to be reinitialized. All 3 of those need to be reset every time you disconnect the battery from one of these, which we just did fairly recently because we had to replace the alternator. So when we replaced the alternator, I didn't know that you needed to reset all of these things, and it started getting engine codes and doing weird things. So we're going to go jump into VCDS and hit all the codes on this and make sure that we have reset the computer the way it needs to be. So that could solve the issue. It could. The other thing is we're finding out that the fluid needs to be changed on this transmission pretty frequently. Like, the recommended interval by Volkswagen is 0 because they say it's a sealed unit and you never need to change it. But what I'm finding from practical sources online is that changing the fluid on this every 40 to 60K is recommended. And to my knowledge, this fluid has never been changed, and it's coming up on 200K miles. 200,000 miles, no fluid change. So we're going to do the codes first. Then, as a matter of preventative maintenance, we are going to dump the fluid and put in some fresh transmission fluid in this. It does not take the same stuff that the 4-speed transmission takes. It takes Mk4 5, so we'll be putting in some like 3.5 quarts of Mk4 5 when we dump this. And then, when we are done with that, we'll drive it around for a little bit and see how it does. If that does not solve all the issues, well, the fluid temperature sensor is part of the ribbon cable that goes to the solenoids. And on this car, it's not like the old transmissions. It's not like the one that we did in this, where you drop the pan, the valve body is right there, the ribbon cable is right there, all the solenoids are right there. No, in this car, they decided that they would mount the valve body in a vertical position toward the front of the motor. So in order to get to it, it is possible to get to it without removing the whole front clip and going into service mode. But from what I've seen from the videos, it's way easier to do it if you do actually take the front clip off, and then you can remove the valve body, and if you need to, you can replace the solenoids, which apparently can solve a lot of these problems, because the solenoids, again, they're going to be the original ones on this car, so they're old. I could take the time to ohm them all out and see which ones are bad and which ones are good, but chances are just replacing them all would be a good thing at that point. So that would be step 3, and at that point I would also do the ribbon cable, which is a pain in the neck to get to. And there is an internal filter, but you can only get to that internal filter if you take off the valve body to get to it. So not really what I want to get into on this. Let's start with the codes and the fluid change, and then we'll see if all the error stuff comes back, because it just started doing this recently, right after the battery was unhooked, right after we did the alternator. I think just resetting the TCU and resetting all that stuff, all the adaptation settings, is going to take care of it. Let's see. One other thing that we're going to do before we reset all the codes and everything is right down here, the main transmission harness connector. Those can get crusty. They can get some corrosion on them, and that can prevent this all from working correctly. And the mass airflow sensor could probably use a cleaning. So I'm going to use the last of my mass airflow sensor cleaner on that. We'll do both of these. I'm going to again use some of that QD electric contact cleaner on this, and then we'll use the CRC mass airflow sensor cleaner on that. And then we will reset the codes and see what happens. Also worth mentioning, even if you don't have this cleaner, a lot of times just the simply unplugging a sensor connector and plugging it back in can clear off corrosion, because they work by friction. So if you unplug them, replug them a couple times, you can clear off corrosion without any of this stuff, and that can get you up and running with some of these things. If you're dealing with a mass airflow sensor, a lot of times they have Phillips head screwdrivers, and sometimes they require security heads. So it looks like this has a Torx security head on it, and I'm going to need to use the appropriate, looks like a T25. So it has the little hole in it and the Torx thing, and that is what is required in order to remove this. Oh, it's even smaller than that. T20 looks like. Ah, T20 is our winner. Well, we got a couple of options here. The first option is I can remove the whole housing, because this is just a standard Phillips head screwdriver that actually attaches it to the airbox, and I can undo the hose clamp, take the whole thing out. And then what I will do is I'm going to use a Dremel to drill some slots in these things so that I can remove them, and we'll replace them with regular screws so we don't have to deal with this problem again, since these are apparently stripped. So yeah, let's do that. All right, that's out. Now we will deal with those annoying security ones. We'll replace them with standard type screws. voila, we will clean the mass airflow sensor. This one's a little different from one in the R32. The R32 has a whole thing running through this section. This one does not. So we're just gonna clean this, and we're gonna clean that separately from this part too. This also needs to be cleaned, but I'm gonna blast it off to the side so it doesn't get the crud into the sensor we're trying to clean. And then just a matter of finding some screws to replace these ones so I don't have to reuse these awful things. So into my spare parts bin, and I should be able to find some. There we go, normal Phillips head screws from my Corrado parts hoard. So we'll use that, throw this back in there, and now let's deal with the codes in the car. All right, let's see here. Going into the transmission in VCDS. And we are going to clear any codes here so we can start fresh as we are, let's see, yep. Implausible, blah, blah, blah. All right, let's clear those. Yes, I want to erase them, thank you. Done. And go back. We're going to close the controller. First thing we're going to do is, and I'm kind of like hacking the matrix here. I got two computers going, so I don't have to be flipping back and forth between different software. So the first thing we're going to do is do the throttle body adaptation. So we'll go into the engine block, and then we are going to go to, when it gets hooked up here, we're going to go to basic settings. And we're going to go to group 60. All right, and that is done. We're going to hit switch to measuring blocks. And done. We want to, oh, I'm sorry, I goofed up here. We want to, let's go back to that. After we see OK, we're supposed to leave it here for about 30 seconds. So fast forward 30 seconds. All right, 30 seconds have elapsed. Now we switch to measuring blocks. Adaptation OK, done, and go back. Okay, now the next thing we want to do, according to the wisdom of the Vortex, we want to do the engine block 63. So let's see here, with the engine warmed up, we want this. So let's go ahead and we're gonna let the engine warm up because it's not warm. So this is gonna take a little while. We will come back once it's warm.
5 minutes later.
So of course I forgot to film after coming back and doing the rest of the VCDS stuff to do the adaptations. So my bad. However, suffice it to say, whenever you are doing a procedure using VCDS, you need to follow it to the letter. So one of them, the procedure to do the transmission adaptation, it took me a few times because I was missing this one key step. It wants you to hit go, press the throttle to the floor, and count to 3, and then before you let go of the throttle, you hit done, OK, and then you let go of the throttle. And I kept letting go of the throttle and then clicking it, and that wasn't doing it right, and it kept getting error codes. So following instructions to the letter, super important when you're doing adaptations and stuff like that. So I've done the throttle body adaptation, I've done the transmission adaptation, and now I'm gonna have to wait and see what the performance is now that we've cleaned those electrical connections, we've cleaned the mass airflow sensor, we have reset the throttle body and the transmission, the TCU. So now theoretically, if those were the issues, then that should go away and she should drive normally. So I will wait to hear back from my son. He's going to take the car tonight to go to his college group at church, and then he'll get the report back to me about whether it drove okay or not. We'll keep an eye on it over the next couple of days. That transmission fluid change absolutely needs to be done regardless of whether or not it solves any problems, because this car's got almost 200,000 miles, and I guarantee that that's the original transmission fluid in there. And the recommendation is about every 60K miles, so it's more than 3 times overdue for this. So we're gonna do that, and I will film that and let you know how it goes, and we'll get back to you. Thanks for tuning in. Hit like, subscribe, and share the video maybe if you find it would be useful for someone. God bless you. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
And on that terrible disappointment, it's time to say goodbye. We'll be back.